The night everything changed, I was standing in the rain outside St. Mercy's Hospital at 11:47 p.m., holding a paper bag of leftover food from the vending machine, wondering if I could survive another 12-hour shift on 4 hours of sleep and a granola bar. I wasn't supposed to be there at that entrance. I usually cut through the parking garage to avoid the wind tunnel that forms between the east wing and the chapel. But the garage elevator was out again, third time that month, and I'd taken the long way around, which is the only reason I saw him at all. He was leaning against the brick wall near the ambulance bay, not moving. At first I thought he was a patient who'd wandered out, or someone who'd had too much to drink. But then I got closer, and I saw the way his hand was pressed against his left side, fingers dark, something that wasn't rain. I stopped. He looked up at me. I am a nurse. I have been a nurse for 4 years. I have seen things in that hospital that would make most people lose sleep for a decade. I am trained for exactly this kind of moment. Stay calm, assess, act. So I don't know why the first thing I thought was that he had the most exhausted eyes I'd ever seen on a person who was still standing upright. Not scared, not angry, just tired in a way that went deeper than his body. "You need to come inside," I said. "No." His voice was low, controlled. "I don't. You're bleeding. I'm aware." I looked around. The ambulance bay was empty. The rain was picking up. I had 7 minutes before I was supposed to clock back in from my break. "Okay," I said. "Then at least let me look at it." He studied me the way people studies exits, calculating. Then something in him seemed to make a decision, and he moved the hand away from his side. It was bad, not immediately fatal, but bad enough that leaving it alone was not a real option. "Come with me," I said. "There's a supply room near the loading dock. Nobody uses it on night shift." He didn't ask why I wasn't taking him through the main entrance. He didn't ask my name. He just pushed off the wall and followed me, and I told myself I was making a clinical decision, not a personal one. I lied to myself a lot that year. My name is June Calloway. I was 28 years old, renting a studio apartment in Ridgewood, Queens, that smelled faintly of old carpet and the Thai place downstairs. I worked nights at St. Mercy's on the surgical recovery floor because night differential pay adds up, and I was 3 years into paying off nursing school loans that felt less like debt and more like a second mortgage on a house I never got to live in. I had a savings account with enough in it to cover 2 months of emergencies. I had a cat named Biscuit, who belonged to my neighbor Mrs. Aldrich, but visited me every morning when I got home. I had a sister in Cincinnati who called on Sundays and asked when I was going to move somewhere with a backyard. I had a life that was small in the way that a seed is small, not lacking, just not yet what it was supposed to become. I did not have a person. That's not a complaint. I want to be clear about that. I had been in 2 relationships that ended the way most things in your 20s end. Not badly, just not well enough to continue. I wasn't looking. I wasn't waiting. I was just living one shift at a time, and it was enough. Until it wasn't. His name, I found out later, was Connor Vale. That night, in the supply room with the buzzing fluorescent light and the shelf of backup saline bags, he didn't tell me anything. He sat on a metal folding chair and let me work, and he watched the door the entire time with the kind of stillness that doesn't come naturally. That's trained behavior. I know what trained behavior looks like because I have it too, for different reasons. The wound was a through and through, something small caliber, in and out of the muscle below his ribs. It had missed anything vital, lucky, or skilled. I found myself wondering which. "This needs stitches," I said. "Real ones, in a real setting. I know, I can close it well enough to hold for now, but you need imaging. You need antibiotics." "I know, so why aren't you going through the ER?" He looked at me then, not at the door, at me, and there was something in that shift of attention that I felt before I understood it. "Because," he said, "there are people in this hospital who would make a phone call if they saw me come in." I pressed gauze against the wound and kept my face neutral. What kind of people? The kind who get paid to make phone calls. I taped the dressing down. My hands were steady. That's the thing about nursing school. They can't teach you the knowledge fast enough, but the hands, those they train until steadiness, is involuntary. "I'm not going to ask you what happened," I said. "Good, but I need to know if whoever did this is going to walk through that door." He was quiet for a moment. "No. You have about 4 hours before anyone comes looking, and they won't look here." "How do you know?" "Because they don't know about this entrance." That meant he did. That meant he'd been here before, or he'd studied this place, and either answer was something I didn't have the time or the clearance to process. I have to get back to my floor, I said. I snapped off my gloves. There's a 24-hour pharmacy 2 blocks east on Junction. Tell them you were in a biking accident. They'll sell you what you need without. June. I stopped. I hadn't told him my name. I was wearing my badge, clipped to my chest, and I hadn't even thought about it. Thank you, he said, just that. Thank you. The way you say it, when you actually mean it. I walked back to my floor and spent the next 4 hours pretending my hands weren't shaking. I didn't expect to see him again. I told myself that 3 times on the subway home the next morning. I told myself once more standing in the shower. I fell asleep and dreamed about the supply room, and the way the fluorescent light had made everything look both too bright and too honest, and when I woke up at noon, I told myself one final time, firmly, like something you say out loud to make it real. I didn't expect to see him again. He was sitting in the diner across from my building. The golden rail has been on that corner since 1987. I eat there twice a week, Tuesday and Friday mornings, when I finish my night shift, and my body wants eggs and coffee before it will agree to sleep. Marlene, who has worked the counter since before I moved to Ridgewood, already has my order up before I sit down. He was in the back booth, clean clothes, no visible sign of the night before. If I hadn't been the one to patch him up myself, I'd have had no way of knowing. I could have sat at the counter, I should have. I walked to the booth. You look better, I said. You look tired. I just worked 12 hours. Sit down, June. You keep using my name like we know each other. We kept each other's secrets last night. That's a kind of knowing. I sat down. Marlene appeared with coffee before I asked, and he waited until she left before he said anything else. I'm not going to pretend I don't owe you something, he said. You don't owe me anything. I'm a nurse. That's what I do. You risked your license. Let's not talk about that, okay? He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. His hands were large and there was a scar across the back of his right one, old and faded to silver. What do you want to talk about? I looked at him. Daylight was different from fluorescent. In daylight he looked like a person, not a situation. Dark hair, a few days of growth on his jaw, the kind of face that would read as ordinary until you noticed that his eyes tracked every movement in the room without his head turning once. Who are you? I said. Connor Vale. That's a name. That's not an answer. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile exactly. More like the memory of one. I work for the federal government, he said, in a department that doesn't show up in directories. Last night was related to a case I've been building for 3 years. That's all I can tell you. You were shot. Yes. And you couldn't go to your own people. The person who shot me was tipped off. I don't know who did it yet. He said it simply without drama. Until I do, I keep my exposure small. I thought about that. I thought about the stillness in him, the way he'd watched the door, the way he'd known about the loading dock entrance. So what happens now? I said. Now I finish what I started, and you go back to your life. And pretend I never saw you. That would be easiest for both of us. The thing about people who are very controlled is that the control itself becomes a kind of signal. What you're holding back is visible in the architecture of everything you allow through. I'd learned that working with patients in pain, the ones who said I'm fine, the clearest were often the ones who weren't. What if I don't want easiest, I said. He looked at me for a long moment. Then I'd say you don't know enough about my situation to make that choice responsibly. So tell me more. June Connor. It was the first time I'd used his name. I watched him register it. This isn't a good idea, he said. I didn't say it was, I said. I just said I didn't want easy. What followed was not a romance in the way movies make romance look. It was, and I want to be honest about this, because people skip over the honest parts, and that feels like a kind of disrespect to what actually happened. It was 2 people moving very carefully around something that scared them both. For different reasons. He came back to the diner the following Tuesday. I told myself it was coincidence until he was there Friday too, and then I stopped telling myself things. We talked. That's the simplest way to put it. We talked in a way I hadn't talked to anyone in a long time, without the performance of talking, without the social calculus of what to say next. He asked questions like he actually wanted the answers. He listened the way people listen when they're not waiting for their turn to speak. I learned things slowly. He was 34, He'd grown up in Boise, Idaho. Third 4 kids. Father was an electrician. Mother taught 4th grade. He'd gone to University of Washington on an ROTC scholarship. Ended up in military intelligence after 2 deployments. Transitioned to federal work 8 years ago. He'd been in New York for 11 months, building a case against a network that moved stolen government contract data to foreign buyers through a series of shell companies and 2 very legitimate-looking mid-sized financial firms in Lower Manhattan. He told me this in pieces, over weeks, in the way you tell someone something you've been keeping only to yourself for so long that the telling itself feels like setting down weight. I told him things too, about my dad, who'd had a heart attack in our kitchen when I was 16 and lived but wasn't ever exactly the same after. About how I'd wanted to be a marine biologist until that year, and then something shifted and I needed to know how to keep people alive, needed it the way you need air. About the loans and the apartment in Biscuit, who he met one morning when he walked me home, and Mrs. Aldrich was in the hallway, and the cat came straight to him, which was not Biscuit's normal behavior at all. He likes you, I said, slightly annoyed. Animals usually do, Connor said, and scratched Biscuit behind the ears without breaking his sentence. And I thought, standing in that hallway in my scrubs with my work shoes still on, that I was in a significant amount of trouble. I want to tell you about the moment things stopped being careful. It was a Saturday in early November, 6 weeks after the supply room. I'd had a brutal shift. We'd lost a patient, a 51-year-old man named Gerald Huang, who'd come through bypass surgery beautifully, and then arrested in recovery at 3 a.m., for reasons that still don't fully make sense to me, that sometimes just happen, and the science doesn't give you enough to grieve properly. I'd done everything right. It didn't matter. I came out of St. Mercy's at 7 in the morning, and Connor was there, not by accident. He was there with coffee from the cart on 68th Street, and a specific look on his face that told me he'd been there long enough to be cold. "How did you know?" I said. "I know your schedule." I should have said something about that. Instead, I took the coffee with both hands because they were cold too. "We lost someone tonight," I said. "I know. You have a look." "What look?" "Like you're still there, like part of you didn't leave yet." Nobody had ever said that to me. Not like that. My sister knew what my job was like in the abstract. My friends from nursing school understood in a professional way. But no one had ever just seen that. The specific thing of it. The way you carry a shift home with you in your body whether you want to or not. I looked at him in the early morning light and I thought, I don't want to be careful anymore. "Come upstairs," I said. "I'll make eggs, and I need you to understand. I know how that sounds, and it was not that. Or it wasn't only that. It was that I wanted to stop standing on opposite sides of something, wanted to stop measuring the distance. I wanted to cook breakfast for someone, and have them sit at my kitchen table and just be there." He said, "Okay." He came upstairs and sat at my kitchen table, and I made eggs, and we ate them in my studio apartment that smelled like old carpet and Thai food while Biscuit wound around his ankles, and by the time the coffee was gone, something had shifted between us, quietly and without ceremony, the way water finds its level. He kissed me once before he left, just once, standing at my door, one hand on the frame, brief and careful and nothing like what I'd expected, and everything I'd somehow already known. "I need to be honest with you about something," he said. "Okay. This case is going to end, one way or another, in the next few weeks. And when it does, the way my work goes, I'll be assigned somewhere else. I don't get to choose where or when. I understand." "I don't think you do." "I don't think I do." He looked at me steadily. "I'm telling you because you deserved to know before." He stopped. "Before this becomes something we can't account for." I nodded. "I appreciate that. June Connor." I matched his tone. "I've been keeping your secret for 6 weeks. I think I understand a little bit about choosing things that don't have guaranteed outcomes." He stood there for another moment. Then he nodded once and left, and I closed the door and leaned against it and told Biscuit, who was sitting in the middle of the floor watching me with enormous judgment, that I was absolutely fine. The call came on a Wednesday morning in late November. I was home, asleep, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did. It was a woman, clipped, professional, identifying herself only as Keating. She told me that Connor Vale had been in an incident the previous evening and was currently in the ICU at a hospital I won't name, and that he had listed me as his emergency contact, which I hadn't known, and that his condition was serious but stable. I sat up in bed. "What happened?" I said. "I can't discuss operational details. I can tell you he asked for you specifically." I was dressed and out the door in 11 minutes. I know because I checked the time when she called, and I checked it again when I hit the street. And it was 11 minutes. And I remember thinking that was not a bad time for someone in socked feet who had to find her shoes. The hospital was in Midtown. I won't say which one. He was conscious when they let me in. He looked worse than he had outside St. Mercy's, and that was already a low bar. There was an IV in his left arm, monitors, the whole architecture of medical intervention that I know too well from the other side. He looked at me when I came in, and something in his face loosened in a way I hadn't seen before. "Hey, Calloway," he said. That was the thing he'd settled on somewhere in the past 6 weeks. Not June, not in private moments, but Calloway, said in a specific tone that managed to be both completely neutral and somehow not neutral at all. "Hey," I said. I pulled up the chair next to the bed. I sat down. I took his hand. It wasn't a decision, it was just what happened. "You came," he said. "You listed me as your emergency contact. I know." "When did you do that?" 6 weeks ago," he said it simply. Like it wasn't a significant thing, except it was, because 6 weeks ago was roughly the second diner morning, which meant he'd done it before either of us had named whatever this was. "You were pretty confident," I said. "I was pretty hopeful," he said. "There's a difference." I looked at him in the hospital light. Different from fluorescent, different from diner daylight, somehow more honest than either. And I thought about all the ways I'd talked myself out of things, all the times I'd measured the distance and decided it was too much. I thought about Gerald Huang and how I'd done everything right and it hadn't mattered. I thought about my dad in the kitchen and the moment everything became about learning to keep people here. "The case," I said, rapt. "Last night was the last piece." "That's what." He gestured slightly at the monitors. "So it's done. It's done, and now you get assigned somewhere else." He looked at me. "There's a position in the New York field office. Permanent posting, ground-based. I put in for it 3 weeks ago." I stared at him. 3 weeks ago. Yes, Connor, that's before. I know when it was." The room was very quiet except for the monitors. Somewhere down the hall someone laughed at something. Normal life, continuing. "You should have told me," I said. "I know." He didn't look away. "I was afraid if I told you, it would feel like pressure. Like I was deciding things for you. And he stopped. "I'd already decided enough things without your input. I thought about the emergency contact, about the diner, twice a week, for 6 weeks, about the kiss at my door and the specific honesty of what he'd said after. I thought about being tired of easy. Okay," I said. "Okay, what?" "Okay, you should have told me." I squeezed his hand once, and okay, I'm glad you put in for the posting. I let out a breath. And okay, I'm not going anywhere. He watched me for a long moment. Then his hand turned under mine and held on properly. "I'm going to be in here for at least a week," he said. "I know, I can read a chart. You're going to come back." "I'm going to come back," I said. "And I'm going to tell you everything wrong with how they've got this IV situated. And you're going to pretend to listen. And Biscuit is going to lose his mind when you finally get out of here, because he imprinted on you like a baby duck and I refuse to take responsibility for that." Connor Vale, who I had met bleeding in the rain outside a hospital loading dock, who had sat at my kitchen table and eaten scrambled eggs and let a borrowed cat sleep on his feet, looked at me with those exhausted, careful eyes that had started to look a little less exhausted lately, and he smiled. Not the memory of one this time. The real thing. And I thought, sitting in a hospital chair with his hand in mine, with the monitors beeping their steady ordinary rhythm, and the late November light coming through the window at a low cold angle, I thought that sometimes you don't find things by looking for them. Sometimes you find them in the rain, at 11:47 at night, when you took the long way around because an elevator was broken. Sometimes the thing that changes everything is so small you almost walk past it. I'm glad I stopped.